May 27, 1942, Pearl Harbor. In the basement of the 14th Naval District Administration Building, Lieutenant Commander Joseph J. Rochefort hunched over intercepted Japanese radio transmissions that would either save the American Pacific Fleet or confirm its complete destruction. 6 months after the devastating attack that had crippled America's naval power, Rochefort and his team at Station Hypo faced a cryptographic puzzle that held the key to the war's outcome in the Pacific. The Japanese Navy's JN-25 code had become America's obsession and nightmare in equal measure. This complex cipher system protected Japanese naval communications with mathematical precision that had resisted Allied code-breaking efforts for months. Every intercepted message represented thousands of Japanese characters that could mean anything or everything, depending on whether Rochefort's analysts could unlock patterns that enemy cryptographers had, designed to be unbreakable. Rochefort himself was an unlikely hero for the electronic age of warfare, a former enlisted man who had taught himself Japanese during peacetime assignments in Tokyo. He possessed the rare combination of linguistic intuition and mathematical precision that made him uniquely qualified to wage war with pencils and calculating machines instead of guns and torpedoes. His Station Hypo team, a mixture of naval officers, enlisted personnel, and civilian contractors, had become America's first line of defense in a conflict where information was more valuable than battleships. The intelligence picture emerging from Station Hypo's analysis painted a terrifying scenario that challenged every assumption American naval strategists held about Japanese capabilities and intentions. Intercepted transmissions suggested that Admiral Yamamoto was planning a massive naval operation that would dwarf Pearl Harbor in scale and strategic significance. But the details remained locked within JN-25 encryptions that yielded their secrets reluctantly, fragment by fragment, through analytical work that combined tedious calculation with intuitive leaps that couldn't be taught in any school. By late May 1942, Rochefort's team had achieved partial penetration of JN-25 that enabled them to read approximately 40% of intercepted Japanese naval communications. It was enough to reveal that something enormous was being planned, but not enough to determine where, when, or with what forces. American intelligence was caught in the worst possible position, knowing that disaster was approaching while being unable to predict its exact form or timing. The fragmentary intelligence Rochefort extracted from Japanese transmissions indicated that Japanese forces were concentrating for an operation designated AF, but American cryptographers couldn't determine whether AF referred to a location in the Aleutian Islands, the west coast of the United States, or somewhere in the Central Pacific, where American naval forces were most vulnerable to surprise attack. The strategic implications were staggering. If Japanese forces were planning another Pearl Harbor-style assault against the American mainland, the Pacific Fleet's remaining carriers would need to defend the west coast. If the target was the Aleutians, American forces would be drawn toward Alaska, while leaving other critical areas undefended. But if AF represented a Central Pacific objective, American naval commanders would need to position their limited forces for a decisive battle that could determine whether the United States remained a Pacific power or became a continental nation isolated from global influence. Rochefort understood that his cryptographic work had moved beyond technical analysis to become strategic decision-making that would affect the survival of American democracy. Every decoded message, every analytical insight, every intuitive leap about Japanese intentions would influence decisions made by admirals who commanded the only naval forces standing between Japanese expansion and American defeat. The pressure was suffocating. American naval strength in the Pacific had been reduced to 3 operational aircraft carriers, and supporting vessels that couldn't match Japanese numerical superiority in any category of warship. Admiral Nimitz, commanding Pacific Fleet operations from his headquarters just miles from Station Hypo, needed intelligence that would enable him to position his limited forces where they could achieve maximum effectiveness against Japanese operations he couldn't yet see clearly. But Rochefort's greatest challenge wasn't technical, it was psychological. His analytical team was working 18-hour shifts while processing intelligence that revealed the enormous scope of Japanese naval preparations. Every intercepted transmission confirmed that enemy forces were assembling for operations that would either establish Japanese dominance across the Pacific or provide American forces with opportunities to inflict decisive defeats that could change the war's trajectory. As May 1942 drew toward its close, Rochefort knew that his team's analytical work would soon be tested by events that no amount of preparation could fully anticipate. The fate of nations was about to be determined by cryptographers who fought with slide rules and code books, proving that in modern warfare, the most decisive battles were sometimes fought not on the ocean's surface, but in the electromagnetic spectrum where victory went to those who could hear truth in static. Lieutenant Commander Joe Rochefort operated from a windowless basement that had become the most important room in the Pacific War, a place where intercepted radio signals were transformed into strategic intelligence that would determine whether American naval forces survived or were systematically destroyed by Japanese operations they couldn't predict or counter. Station Hypo represented something unprecedented in military history, a fusion of linguistic expertise, mathematical analysis, and intuitive insight that enabled a small team of specialists to peer into enemy planning with accuracy that amazed even experienced intelligence professionals. The JN-25 code system that protected Japanese naval communications had been designed by cryptographers who understood that modern warfare depended on secure communications that could coordinate complex operations across vast ocean distances. The code itself was a masterpiece of mathematical complexity, a system that used random number groups to encrypt Japanese text, then applied additional cipher layers that changed according to predetermined schedules. Breaking JN-25 required not just mathematical skill, but cultural understanding of Japanese naval terminology, operational procedures, and strategic thinking. Rochefort's background made him uniquely qualified for this hybrid of analytical and cultural interpretation. His pre-war assignments in Japan had provided him with fluent Japanese language skills and intimate knowledge of Japanese naval culture that enabled him to understand not just what intercepted messages said, but what they meant within the context of Japanese military thinking. He could recognize when routine communications contained hints about larger operations, when administrative messages concealed strategic preparations, and when Japanese officers were using circumlocution to discuss sensitive topics they preferred not to transmit directly. The Station Hypo team that Rochefort assembled represented the best cryptographic talent the U.S. Navy could mobilize on short notice. Commander Edwin Layton provided strategic analysis that connected individual decoded messages to broader intelligence pictures. Lieutenant Commander Wesley Wright contributed mathematical expertise that enabled systematic attacks on JN-25's numerical foundations. Ensign Jack Williams brought the kind of intuitive pattern recognition that could identify hidden relationships within seemingly random data. But perhaps the most crucial team member was Chief Radioman Dwayne Whitlock, whose ability to recognize individual Japanese radio operators by their transmission characteristics enabled Station Hypo to track Japanese naval units even when their communications were encrypted. Whitlock could identify specific ships by the electrical signatures of their radio equipment, determine operator skill levels by analyzing transmission timing, and even detect when Japanese radiomen were operating under stress that indicated unusual operational circumstances. The breakthrough that would change everything came through a combination of analytical persistence and tactical deception that demonstrated Rochefort's understanding of both cryptographic technique and psychological warfare. By late May 1942, Station Hypo had determined that the mysterious AF designation appeared frequently in Japanese communications about major operational planning, but American cryptographers couldn't determine whether AF referred to a specific geographic location or was simply an administrative code with no tactical significance. Rochefort developed an elegant solution that used Japanese monitoring capabilities against themselves. He arranged for American forces at Midway Atoll to transmit an uncoded message reporting equipment problems with their water purification systems. The message was deliberately sent on frequencies that Japanese monitoring stations were known to intercept, creating what appeared to be routine administrative traffic that enemy intelligence would process without recognizing its significance as deliberate disinformation. Within 48 hours, Station Hypo intercepted Japanese communications, reporting that AF was short of water, confirming that the mysterious designation referred to Midway Atoll and that Japanese forces were planning major operations against the American base that controlled access to Hawaiian waters. Rochefort's deception had solved the most critical intelligence puzzle facing American naval planners, while simultaneously confirming that Japanese operational security could be penetrated through creative analytical methods. The intelligence picture that emerged from subsequent JN-25 analysis revealed the full scope of Japanese planning with detail that seemed impossible given the limitations of 1942 cryptographic technology. Admiral Yamamoto was planning to use the largest naval force ever assembled by any nation to capture Midway Atoll, destroy American naval forces that responded to defend it, and establish Japanese control over Central Pacific waters that would make further American resistance strategically impossible. Japanese forces would include 4 aircraft carriers with experienced aircrews, multiple battleship divisions with the most powerful naval guns ever constructed, and amphibious assault forces trained for operations against fortified positions. The attack would be coordinated with diversionary operations in the Aleutian Islands designed to confuse American strategic planning and draw naval forces away from the Central Pacific, where the decisive battle would be fought. But Rochefort's analysis also revealed potential weaknesses in Japanese planning that could be exploited by American forces if Admiral Nimitz was willing to accept risks that conventional naval strategy would consider unacceptable. The intelligence gathered through Station Hypo's cryptographic work would either enable the most decisive American naval victory since the War of 1812, or provide a detailed preview of American defeat that couldn't be prevented despite advance warning. June 3, 1942. As Japanese naval forces approached Midway Atoll with the largest fleet ever assembled for Pacific operations, the intelligence gathered by Station Hypo was about to be tested in the most decisive naval battle since Trafalgar. Admiral Nimitz had made the extraordinary decision to position America's remaining Pacific Fleet carriers based entirely on Rochefort's cryptographic analysis, a gamble that would either vindicate intelligence warfare or confirm that no amount of advance warning could overcome Japanese naval superiority. The tactical situation that confronted American naval commanders was simultaneously hopeful and terrifying. Station Hypo's penetration of JN-25 had provided detailed intelligence about Japanese force composition, operational timing, and strategic objectives that enabled American forces to prepare for battle with unprecedented knowledge of enemy intentions. But the same intelligence also revealed that Japanese naval forces outnumbered American defenders in every category of warship while possessing superior aircraft, more experienced aircrews, and tactical advantages that had enabled them to dominate Pacific waters for 6 months. Admiral Nimitz's decision to trust Rochefort's intelligence represented a revolution in military decision-making that challenged traditional concepts of command authority and strategic planning. Previous naval battles had been fought with limited intelligence about enemy capabilities and no advance warning about enemy intentions. Commanders made tactical decisions based on immediate observations and general strategic understanding, accepting uncertainty as an inevitable aspect of warfare that couldn't be eliminated through better information. But the Battle of Midway would be fought by American commanders who possessed detailed knowledge of Japanese battle plans, force dispositions, and tactical intentions that enemy officers assumed were protected by unbreakable cryptographic security. Nimitz could position his carriers where they would achieve maximum tactical advantage, coordinate air attacks against Japanese forces at moments when enemy defenses were most vulnerable, and exploit weaknesses in Japanese operational planning that Yamamoto's staff hadn't recognized. The most critical intelligence Rochefort provided concerned Japanese operational timing and aircraft management procedures that would create brief windows of opportunity when Japanese forces would be most vulnerable to coordinated American attacks. Station Hypo's analysis had revealed that Japanese carriers would be conducting aircraft operations according to precisely scheduled sequences that would leave them temporarily unable to defend against air attacks launched at specific times. Commander Edwin Layton who served as Admiral Nimitz's intelligence officer, had briefed Pacific Fleet commanders on tactical opportunities that existed only because of Rochefort's cryptographic work. Japanese forces would be most vulnerable during the period when their aircraft were being refueled and rearmed for second-wave attacks against Midway's defensive installations. If American carrier aircraft could locate Japanese forces during this critical window, they might achieve tactical surprise against enemy ships that couldn't launch defensive fighters or conduct evasive maneuvers. But exploiting intelligence required tactical execution that conventional naval warfare hadn't prepared American commanders to attempt. Success would depend on coordinating attacks by aircraft launched from carriers operating hundreds of miles apart, timing airstrikes to arrive simultaneously, despite different flight distances and aircraft performance characteristics, and maintaining operational security that prevented Japanese forces from detecting American preparations until attacks were already underway. The battle began exactly as Rochefort's intelligence had predicted, with Japanese air attacks against Midway's defensive installations that followed schedules and tactical procedures Station Hypo had identified through JN-25 analysis. American defenders were prepared for attacks they had anticipated for weeks, enabling them to inflict heavier casualties on Japanese air crews while preserving defensive capabilities that Japanese planners had expected to eliminate completely. But the decisive moment came when American carrier aircraft located Japanese forces during the precise window of vulnerability that Rochefort's analysis had identified. Japanese carriers were conducting refueling and rearming operations that left them unable to launch defensive fighters or take evasive action when American dive bombers achieved complete tactical surprise against ships whose decks were covered with armed aircraft and exposed aviation fuel. The destruction of 4 Japanese aircraft carriers in a single morning represented the most decisive naval victory in American history, but it was also vindication of intelligence warfare as a strategic capability that could enable inferior forces to defeat superior enemies through better information rather than superior firepower. Rochefort's team had proven that cryptographic analysis could provide tactical advantages equivalent to additional naval forces that didn't exist in American inventories. The psychological impact on Japanese naval operations was as significant as the material losses. Japanese commanders had planned future operations based on assumptions that their communications were secure. Their strategic intentions were unknown to American intelligence, and their operational planning was protected by cryptographic systems that enemy analysts couldn't penetrate. The Battle of Midway demonstrated that these assumptions were false, forcing Japanese naval staff to question the security of all their communications and the reliability of planning that depended on maintaining operational surprise. Station Hypo's cryptographic victory had achieved something more profound than tactical success. It had established intelligence warfare as a strategic capability that would influence every subsequent Pacific operation. June 4th, 1942, 10:20 hours. In the space of 6 minutes, American dive bombers destroyed 3 Japanese aircraft carriers and damaged a 4th so severely that it would sink before sunset. The most decisive naval victory in American history had been achieved not through superior numbers or advanced technology, but through cryptographic intelligence that enabled Admiral Nimitz to position his forces exactly where Rochefort's analysis had predicted they would achieve maximum tactical advantage against an enemy fleet that had considered itself invulnerable. The destruction of the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu represented more than material losses. It was confirmation that intelligence warfare had become as important as conventional naval combat in determining strategic outcomes. Japanese naval aviation had lost not just 4 carriers, but the trained air crews and maintenance specialists who represented years of pre-war training that couldn't be rapidly replaced, even if Japanese shipyards could construct replacement vessels. But perhaps more significantly, the Battle of Midway had validated Station Hypo's cryptographic methods in ways that would influence American intelligence operations for the remainder of the war. Rochefort's team had proven that systematic analysis of enemy communications could provide strategic advantages that conventional reconnaissance couldn't achieve. That mathematical cryptography combined with cultural understanding could penetrate security systems that enemy forces considered unbreakable. The strategic implications extended far beyond the Pacific theater. American intelligence officials recognized that Rochefort's success at Midway represented a fundamental change in how modern wars would be fought, with cryptographic analysis becoming as important as conventional military operations in determining strategic outcomes. The ability to read enemy communications provided advantages that were equivalent to having spies in enemy headquarters, observers at enemy planning sessions, and advance copies of operational orders that enemy commanders assumed were secure. Admiral King, commanding U.S. naval operations globally, submitted classified reports to the Joint Chiefs of Staff describing cryptographic capabilities that had enabled American naval forces to achieve decisive victory despite Japanese numerical superiority in every category of warship. The reports emphasized that intelligence warfare represented a strategic capability that could multiply American military effectiveness while reducing casualties that conventional operations would have required. But the victory also revealed organizational challenges that American military institutions weren't prepared to address. Rochefort's team had operated outside normal intelligence channels, developing analytical methods that weren't recognized by existing doctrine and achieving results that challenged traditional concepts of how military intelligence was supposed to function. Station Hypo's success demonstrated that effective cryptographic operations required institutional flexibility that military bureaucracies found difficult to accommodate. The most significant challenge concerned personnel management and career development for specialists whose skills didn't fit conventional military categories. Rochefort himself was a naval officer whose greatest contributions came through mathematical analysis and linguistic interpretation rather than traditional naval operations. His team included enlisted personnel whose cryptographic expertise made them more valuable than many commissioned officers, and civilian contractors whose specialized knowledge was essential to operations that military education hadn't prepared anyone to conduct. The technical lessons from Midway influenced American cryptographic operations throughout the Pacific War, with Station Hypo's methods being adapted for use against Japanese Army communications, diplomatic traffic, and commercial transmissions that revealed economic and political information valuable for strategic planning. The analytical techniques Rochefort developed for penetrating JN-25 became templates for attacking other Japanese cipher systems, with varying degrees of success depending on enemy security measures and American analytical capabilities. Perhaps most importantly, the Battle of Midway had demonstrated that intelligence warfare could provide strategic advantages that were particularly valuable for American forces operating at numerical disadvantages against enemies who possessed superior numbers of conventional weapons. Cryptographic analysis enabled smaller American forces to achieve tactical surprise, exploit enemy weaknesses, and coordinate operations with precision that multiplied their effectiveness beyond what their numbers would suggest. The psychological impact on American military planning was as profound as the tactical victories. Military commanders who had been skeptical about intelligence warfare became advocates for expanded cryptographic operations, understanding that information superiority could be more valuable than additional ships, aircraft, or personnel. The success at Midway proved that American technological and analytical capabilities could be leveraged to overcome material disadvantages through better understanding of enemy intentions and capabilities. But Rochefort's greatest achievement may have been demonstrating that modern warfare required new forms of military expertise that combined technical knowledge with cultural understanding, mathematical precision with intuitive insight, and individual analytical brilliance with systematic institutional support. The cryptographers who fought in Station Hypo's basement had proven that some of the war's most decisive battles would be fought not with conventional weapons, but with pencils, calculating machines, and the intellectual courage to challenge assumptions that everyone else accepted without question. The Japanese naval forces retreating from Midway carried with them more than tactical defeat. They carried the knowledge that American intelligence capabilities had achieved penetration of their most secure communications, forcing them to question every assumption about operational security that had guided their strategic planning since the war began. The months following Midway would confirm that Rochefort's cryptographic breakthrough had fundamentally altered the strategic balance in the Pacific War, but the full implications of Station Hypo's achievement would only become clear as American intelligence operations expanded to encompass Japanese communications throughout the theater. The techniques developed for penetrating JN-25 became the foundation for systematic intelligence warfare that would influence every major Pacific operation until Japan's surrender in 1945. Admiral Nimitz's post-battle assessment, classified secret until 1972, credited Station Hypo's intelligence with enabling American naval forces to achieve tactical and strategic surprise that overcame Japanese numerical superiority through superior information rather than superior firepower. The report emphasized that cryptographic intelligence had become an essential component of American military capability that needed institutional support commensurate with its strategic importance. But Rochefort's personal fate revealed the institutional challenges that American military organizations faced when confronting innovations that didn't fit existing administrative categories. Despite his decisive contribution to the most important American naval victory since the War of 1812, Rochefort was transferred from Station Hypo in October 1942 due to bureaucratic conflicts with Washington-based intelligence officials who resented his operational independence and analytical methods that challenged established procedures. The transfer represented more than personnel administration. It reflected deeper tensions between innovative field operations and institutional hierarchies that valued conformity over effectiveness. Rochefort's success had demonstrated that cryptographic analysis required analytical freedom and operational flexibility that military bureaucracies found difficult to accommodate, particularly when field units achieved results that embarrassed higher headquarters or challenged accepted doctrine. However, the analytical methods Rochefort developed survived his departure and became standard procedures for American cryptographic operations throughout the Pacific War. His successors at Station Hypo continued penetrating Japanese naval communications with techniques that enabled American forces to anticipate enemy operations, exploit tactical weaknesses, and coordinate offensive operations with intelligence support that conventional reconnaissance couldn't provide. The broader impact of Station Hypo's work extended beyond tactical intelligence to include strategic deception operations that used Japanese monitoring capabilities against themselves. American commanders learned to transmit false information through channels they knew Japanese intelligence was monitoring, creating deceptive intelligence that influenced enemy planning while concealing actual American intentions. The psychological warfare that began with Rochefort's water shortage deception at Midway evolved into systematic programs that made Japanese strategic planning increasingly unreliable. Post-war analysis by the Naval War College determined that cryptographic intelligence had shortened the Pacific War by an estimated 18 months, while reducing American casualties by approximately 250,000 personnel who would have been killed or wounded in conventional operations that intelligence warfare made unnecessary. The economic impact was equally significant, with intelligence operations saving resources equivalent to constructing dozens of additional aircraft carriers, hundreds of escort vessels, and thousands of aircraft that weren't needed because better information enabled more efficient use of existing forces. The technical innovations pioneered at Station Hypo influenced American intelligence capabilities throughout the Cold War era and beyond. The combination of mathematical analysis, cultural understanding, and systematic methodology that Rochefort developed for attacking JN-25 became the template for subsequent American cryptographic operations against Soviet, Chinese, and other adversary communication systems. Modern computer-based cryptography still employs analytical principles that trace their origins to techniques developed by hand calculation in Station Hypo's basement. Perhaps most significantly, Rochefort's achievement established intelligence warfare as a strategic capability that could enable democratic nations to compete effectively against totalitarian adversaries who possessed superior numbers of conventional weapons. The analytical approach that combined technical expertise with cultural insight proved particularly effective against rigid enemy organizations whose operational security depended on assumptions about American capabilities that systematic intelligence collection could reveal to be false. The recognition that Rochefort finally received came decades after his contributions had been declassified and historical analysis had confirmed the strategic importance of his work. In 1986, he was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Medal with citation language acknowledging that his cryptographic analysis and intelligence leadership were decisive factors in the American naval victory at Midway and subsequent Pacific operations that determined the outcome of World War II. Today, the National Security Agency's National Cryptologic Museum displays Station Shaipo artifacts alongside explanations of how Rochefort's team fought the war with slide rules and intuition, proving that in modern conflict, victory often belongs not to those with the most weapons, but to those who can hear truth in the silence between enemy words. The basement room where Rochefort worked has been preserved as a reminder that some of history's most decisive battles were fought not on conventional battlefields, but in the electromagnetic spectrum, where a small team of specialists transformed intercepted radio signals into strategic intelligence that saved more American lives than any conventional military operation could have rescued through traditional courage and sacrifice. In the end, Rochefort and his Station Hypo team had proven that modern warfare created new forms of heroism that traditional military culture was slow to recognize, that intellectual courage could be as important as physical bravery, and that sometimes the most profound victories were achieved by those who fought in silence, armed with nothing more dangerous than pencils, patience, and the analytical skill to find patterns that revealed enemy secrets hidden within seemingly random static.